Mr. Mike Johnson, 717 in the house, Union Gospel Mission Executive Director, President, big guy in charge, former Army Ranger. Got your Ranger shirt on today.
It's a coincidence, actually. It's just the one that I haven't worn in 7 days, so all the other ones are dirty.
That's okay.
Got it.
It's okay. We're proud of you, man.
That's that sort of Ranger precision of making sure that you're adequately outfitted for each eventuality.
I guess,
right,
yeah. You plan ahead, and then you got the backup to the backup
There
to the
you go.
backup.
Your shirt has
yeah.
Ranger, and then it has Ranger. So, I mean, was the top part, did you have to earn that part there? You know, this is Ranger. I mean,
Yeah, so the lower part is called the Ranger Scroll, and that's the unit insignia. So this confuses everybody. There's two different kinds of Rangers in the Army. There's working Rangers that are in the 75th Ranger Regiment. There's 3 battalions, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Battalion. And they're stationed in different places in the United States to give them essentially a more rapid capacity for response. So you've got a West Coast Battalion and an East Coast Battalion. And then one that's a little more central. It's not much more central, but a little tiny bit more central at least. It's at Fort Benning, 3rd Battalion
Right.
and Regimental Headquarters at Fort Benning. And but originally you had 1st and 2nd on the East and the West Coast, and they were supposed to be this rapid response force. And sort of like the SWAT team of the Army, if you think of it that way. And so 2nd Battalion, this is what that part says. So that's a unit. But then the upper part is the Ranger Tab. A Ranger Tab is an award that's earned by graduating from Ranger School, which is a small unit combat leadership school run by the U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning. So you don't have to be in a Ranger Battalion to go through this small unit combat leadership school that's named after the Rangers.
But
because
you
do
did.
Ranger kind of stuff. Yeah. So usually you'll end up, if you spend any time in the Ranger Battalion, you'll end up with both of them. Yeah.
Well, a lot of vets talking today. A lot of vets talking yesterday about what's going on in Afghanistan. Just speechless. They can't believe that we're leaving Americans behind. On and on. You've heard it all. Give us your thoughts.
Oh my goodness! So I didn't sleep well a couple
Yeah.
nights ago because I
Yeah.
made the mistake of consuming some updates on what's happening in
Right.
Kabul around the airport and
Right.
with these folks, and I think that. To zoom out a little bit, right? So obviously the news itself is really bad and it's really ugly, but mostly because most of us are motivated by some sets of principles. So Proverbs, the book of Proverbs says it's better to be honest and poor than to be wealthy and a fool. Because to the book of Proverbs, the worst thing in the world is not lacking resources; it's lacking wisdom. All right, so or lacking character, right? And because in Proverbs, the idea is if you've got a bunch of resources but you don't have any character, you're just going to fritter it all away anyway, and you're going to be done with it. But if you're a person of character and diligence and honesty, you won't stay poor. That's the idea in the book of Proverbs. And so the problem with progressivism as a philosophy is that it's sort of fundamentally atheistic in that it really is the attempt to apply science to every solution. And not every solution is a science solution. Not every solution is a technical solution. Some solutions are some problems are not problems of technicality, they're problems of character. But we thought, right, that money and resources really are the things that make the world go round, and we thought that we could solve every problem with just the smart application of learning. And so the American progressives in the 20s and 30s had this soft spot for the communists, because communism is an economic philosophy, progressivism is a political philosophy, but they tend to go together, right, because they both are about central control. And so American communists had this sort of safe haven in America in the 20s and 30s, sort of the way that Al-Qaeda had a safe haven with the Taliban, because they were ideological bedfellows. That gave us Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And that gave us a Soviet Union that had nuclear weapons, right? And then all of a sudden we're like, oh my goodness, we've got a big problem there. So that gave us our relationship with China. Because we thought that if we could get China to essentially move into the capitalist direction, right, that they would be this counterpoint to communist Russia. But you can have this thing called progressive capitalism. That's what socialism is. Socialism is progressivism, government by experts, on an overlay of a capitalist economy. And so in socialism, the means of production aren't directly governed or owned by like they are in communism. They're merely regulated. The government acts as
I'm getting lost here.
Am I losing you?
Yeah, you're losing me.
So we thought that we could get China to become rich and then they would be nice. And we thought we could pay the Taliban to not attack us. And all we ended up doing through Pakistani ISI was paying them to attack us less.
Bingo. Yeah.
Okay, we paid them to attack us less, but in the process, we made them rich and powerful. Okay, so we did with the Taliban exactly what we've done with China.
Wow. Okay.
And we now are you following me now?
Yeah, I am
okay.
now. Yeah.
And the reason we did that is because we thought we were smarter than gravity.
Yeah.
We thought we could outsmart gravity. We thought the world is all just a big technical problem, instead of the world operating off of some guiding principles that when you violate them, you crash into the ground. And that's the point of the book of Proverbs, is you can violate these rules and you can defy gravity for a little while. It's called jumping, but eventually you come back down. And so we thought we could violate some principles and we could make fools wealthy, and that would turn them into smart people, and that would turn them into nice people, and all it did was turn them into highly capacitated bad people.
And that's who we're dealing with right now.
And that is exactly what we're dealing with right now. It is, and so it's just absolutely. So as a vet who understands, especially as a special ops vet, right, who understands the role that Pakistani ISI has played in working with and against the Taliban at the same time. Okay, so
that's one of the interesting things is that the nuances and the complexities of being with and against at the same time.
Well, it's a lot like, imagine you have someone on the inside of some organization, right? They've got to give you enough to justify themselves from not getting arrested, right? They got to prove their value to you by giving by
give up something to
they got to
more.
give up some stuff, right? But if they give up too much, then it becomes obvious that they're a person on the inside. So they have to let some things go, but stop other things.
Well, it's like when we solved the codes in World War II. You have to let some towns get taken out so they don't even know that we know that they're going there, right?
Exactly right. And so all of those calculations get put into place with the Taliban in Pakistan and the ISI, and are literally billions of dollars since 9/11 that we have funneled into the Pakistani ISI that has eventually given the Taliban the resources that they needed to retake Afghanistan. We paid the Taliban to recapture Afghanistan from us. Wow. And then we negotiated and sat down and gave it back to them, because all of that was determined to be better, right, than the Pakistan and the ISI and these bad guys sort of running along without any of our hooks in them, right? And so our idea was that we would at least have a hook in them. But I think what we should all start seeing through China is that strategy, but 30 years down the road. Eventually, all you have is an enemy who's now wealthy enough to actually oppose you. And so Taliban's just playing the long game, same way China played the long game, same situation, exactly the same situation. And we can see what's happened with us in China, and that is exactly what's going to happen with us in Afghanistan and the Taliban. There are some people that you cannot be friends with.
All right, so when you are the Democrats and you care and you love everybody and you're superior to a hard line, right and wrong, black and white Republicans, how do you ever get moved into a position where you're willing to see that and act on that when that's part of your oppositional identity to conservatism?
Well, so I don't know the answer to that question. So what I do in my field, right, is when I have professional disagreements with folks that are really trying to be loving and kind and nice, right, and they are authentically positively motivated, okay, and I try to meet them, where I can meet them, and then I try to offer them data, and then I try to back up that data with real world examples. And then what I have to do is I have to be prepared to say where I'm not going to go, right? So we don't do government contracts and funding or homeless services because it's not worth it. The control you give up is too much. It makes us compromise our values, and what you get is generally costs more to implement than they pay for anyway, right? And then it's all really brittle and it changes in the next funding cycle anyway. So it's just not worth it. So you have to know what's not worth it for you, right? And so we have to be able to know where it's just not worth it for us. We're not going to go there. So we're going to give you all the data we can about COVID or whatever it is. We're going to give you all the data that we can about this stuff. We're going to show you where it's at, but ultimately we understand that we might not actually convince you for ideological reasons. Who we want to convince is the convincible, right? The people that aren't ideologues. And that's the majority of the folks in the middle, and then you have a majority, and then you can actually do something.
All right, but from on a governmental level, you're talking about people who they don't necessarily reap the consequences of some of their decisions. They can be voted out. New administrations can change. So you got people willing to play the long game with the Chinese because the system doesn't force them to accept the realities of what that long game will provide, or what the end result will be. So, we trade pieces on the game, and they all play that same swamp game, and we're headed down a road toward what you just described, funding our greatest opposition.
Precisely. So I think that what this means for us as just folks in the, out there doing our jobs, right, is that we have to once again really believe in the American idea of the people, and that it's on us to be educated. It's on us to know what's going on. It's on us to elect people who are educated and know what's going on. And it's on us to hold people accountable. And it's on us to organize. We have to essentially reassert leadership. We bought in, the American people bought into the progressive idea that we could turn over control to people that knew better than us, and we would allow them to regulate us, and we would allow them to tell us what to do. How are those experts working for you guys now?
Not so much.
Exactly. Okay. And you see it in Afghanistan. You're going to see it with China. You're going to see it everywhere, because the entire American idea is founded on the premise that is simply not the case, that there is a selection of some humans that are better than other humans, and if you could just put those people in charge, right? The Europeans called those people royalty. Progressives call them experts. But they don't exist. There are not a group of subset of humans that are just better than other humans, and if we could just put those people in charge, everything would be fine. That's a fantasy.
You hear us call them elites, right?
Yeah, it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy, and middle-class America has to once again reassert its belief in itself, that America is and people are what we choose to be, what we work hard to do. We are the principles that we choose to put in place, or they're the principles we choose to violate, right? But what matters is how we live and what we do today, and that is actually the way the world works, and we need to start believing in ourselves again.
Well,
Bingo.
Perfect. And here are some of the roadblocks to that. You've got an elite media who thinks that they are smarter and better than everybody, so their assessment and their pronouncement is the final word. And now they've got big tech to back that up.
Right, what you're doing right now is you're talking to somebody who's trained in special ops, right? A small group of intelligent, slightly resourced, but creative and lateral is the right word, sort of sideways, individuals can wreak a heck of a lot of havoc, in a system, because all systems, they calcify, and all systems require a bunch of things. And this is the insurgency, and so we have counterinsurgency and insurgency in the military, because you don't necessarily have to, at least to get things started, right? You don't necessarily have to have giant set piece militaries fighting each other. What you need to have is a group of folks that actually believe in some things, and that are willing to be creative, and so it's time now. It's our turn, right now. It's our turn as middle class Americans to start believing in some things again and to get creative. It is simply not the case that big tech can stop anybody and everybody from doing stuff.
But look where we're pushed right now. We are the white supremacists. We are America's greatest existential threat. We have been...
You're making my case, which is why we need to start getting busy.
That's my point. For half the country, we are the bad guys. And we have... I don't know if we've allowed ourselves to be painted that way by not enough pushback, or if we're afraid that pushback only would confirm that assessment of us, or what it is. But I'm looking forward to... Where's the military saying, sorry, Mr. President, that's a step too far over the line from who and what we are as an institution, as an organization, and as our core values.
Well, how about we take that up in the next segment? We'll talk about military and the state of the military.
We've got 10,000 at the airport and more awaiting departure. If the gates are closed, I wonder if somebody does know the number of Americans that are out there, or if it is a great unknown.
Fox News was saying this morning 7,000.
7,000?
Yeah.
Outside, still needing to get in?
Right. I was just commenting, and we were sitting here as he was talking. He's showing the buses of Afghans walking off the bus, and I'm saying, gee, imagine if you're an American caught behind the lines and you're like watching, these Afghans get off the bus in Dulles Airport, and you're like, what? I mean, I'm sorry, but I think they should be Americans walking off those buses first.
Well, yeah, but they'd have to actually be at the airport, Lance.
Well, I know.
So, yeah, so British special ops and Italian special ops have been out in Kabul rounding up their people, but our folks have been given the order to stay inside, right?
That's just.
Well, so as a soldier, there are two things that are just inexplicable to me. I mean, absolutely unexplainable to me. Right. Two things in all of this. The first is that that we allowed military hardware to be abandoned and transferred to our opponents, and the second is that we are leaving people behind. So there's like two things you just don't do. You just don't do those things. Like, you might as well just, pull out your sidearm and shoot yourself in the leg, if you're going to do those things. And you don't do those things. There's in all of Ranger history since 1756, there is one Ranger missing in action. And he's from World War II, a guy named Ranger Champion. Everybody knows his name because he's the only one, and there will never be a second. I knew that I would die to retrieve my comrades' dead bodies off the battlefield. And they would die to retrieve my dead body off the battlefield. We don't leave people behind. Yes. It's like that's something you don't do, and you also don't leave behind guns for your enemies. When we invaded Panama, one of the Rangers was walking across the street, and he walked across a cesspool, and he didn't know it, and he fell into on this corrugated tin, fell in and caught himself on the lip. But to do that, he had to drop his M16 into this vat, essentially, of feces and urine and water, right? And the lieutenant comes running over, and Ranger's like, LT, give me a hand up. And he's like, where's your weapon, Ranger? And he made him drop down in there and go find it. We capsized a Zodiac one time in a river in Panama and lost some weapons, and we had to send divers down there to get them because at the bottom of the freaking Chagres River, which is the largest breeding ground in the world for hammerhead sharks, and
says a lot.
But we were not going to leave weapons behind, right?
Says a lot.
And so these are things that are just unexplainable to me. And they really call into question for me the competence of the leadership right now. But that, I mean, the military leadership has been being ideologically vetted and purged for a long time. You had 8 good years of that in the Obama administration, and then we've been getting a bunch of that since then too. And so you start. The problem, right, is this great irony is when you try to put the experts in charge, eventually what you have are the mediocrities in charge.
And we're seeing that now.
It certainly seems to be the case. I mean, because there are just certain things you just don't do here, and it doesn't matter who tells you to do them. You don't do them. You destroy the helicopter. You don't leave the helicopter undestroyed.
Like when they went for Osama, right?
Exactly.
One of the choppers went down, and they had to make sure to blow it up before they got out of there.
Exactly. And so these are people understand these things, and these are lessons that are learned through centuries of military conflict. These are lessons that have been learned, and so they're principles, right? And most of us live our lives on the basis of some principles. And we would rather be poor and honest, right, than rich and deceitful and foolish, because we know that second thing doesn't last. And we're trying to take care of our kids and our grandkids, and so we know that there's some things that you got to do. There's some things that you don't do, and they may or may not always pay off in the shortest run, right? But you play the long game, and you make the wise decisions, and you do what works in the long run. And what works in the long run is shooting straight with people, being honest with people, your word being your bond, a bunch of things. Right? And we know that because that's the world we live in, because we are subject to the consequences of our actions. And this is the danger of wealth. The danger of wealth is that it insulates people from the consequences of their actions, and they stop living in reality. So I want all the listeners to understand. I'm not making partisan points here. Like nothing of what I'm saying today about Afghanistan or any of this stuff is a partisan point. These are observations of a soldier about a military situation, and so I'm not trying to.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
But I do believe there are certain principles that are true.
I believe you're right. 100%. I believe you're right. The problem then becomes one of what you're saying lining up better with one party than another, and that's where the assumption of by a partisanship can come from, because that sounds an awful lot like what I hear my conservative friends saying. So but the point is, there are immutable truths out there, and you got to play by those rules ultimately if to have success.
Yeah, and I think you hear this kind of language more often, with folks that have an R behind their name than a D behind their name, because of the historic connection between that party and business. And business has to live in the real world to some meaningful degree. The only businesses that are you see like not living in sort of the real world are the ones that are too big to fail. They're huge. They're the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts and the woke ones like Coca-Cola. They can get sort of stupid and lose some of their customer base over some of this wokeness stuff, because they're so big, they're so rich, right? They can defy reality a little bit, but you can only defy reality so long. You can jump pretty high, but eventually you come back down again. You can't out expert gravity. It can't be done, but that's a perfect parallel, right? So like wealth gives you the illusion of being able to defy gravity.
Going back to your two principles that were broken.
Yeah, these unexplainable things, like leaving behind military equipment and leaving behind people.
What's the consequences? What are we looking at? What's our future look like?
Well, I think one of the most devastating consequences that I don't hear literally anyone, not anywhere, anyone on any, I've been, anywhere I've seen, is the loss of faith and confidence of rank and file military personnel in their leadership. Because they've now watched the military do things that you don't do. You don't leave people behind. You don't leave equipment and weapons behind. You don't do it. And we've now watched our military leadership do that. And like there should have any military leader who is told, essentially, just leave now, darn it. I want people out. Leave the helicopters, leave the guns, leave the Americans. I want them out right now. And if you don't do it, then I'll fire you and I'll get the next person, right? Like they should have said, then you're going to have to fire me and get the next person. And like this is what happened with Nixon. So here's what happens, right? If I can see that, right? And if I can see that,
exactly.
If I can see that, then I guarantee there are sergeants and lieutenants and captains and non-commissioned officers and privates all over the place who see this, right? And so what they see is our leaders are people without principle. Our leaders are people who will, to keep their job, they will do something they know is wrong.
Well, I said this morning, why aren't we then disobeying those orders coming from people that are in violation of everything that we are? Get on the plane, soldier. Sorry, Captain, can't do it. We got people out there, and I'm not leaving till we do.
Yeah, so one of the first things that happened when I joined the Army and I got to basic training is they shaved my head. And then after that, I got to basic training, and they took us in first week. They took us in this big old classroom, and they gave us a 3-hour-long class on the laws of land warfare and what's called an illegal order.
Mm-hmm. I remember.
And they told us you have a moral and ethical and a constitutional obligation to disobey an illegal order. Because the military at that time was still smarting over My Lai and Vietnam and some of the things that had been done in Vietnam. There were literally Vietnamese phrases still floating around within Ranger culture, and so like I actually know a few little Vietnamese phrases because the guys that were ahead of me a generation, right? That stuff was still embedded in our culture. Now they're all Arabic phrases, because the military was still smarting over some things that had been done wrong in Vietnam, right? They placed this big emphasis on ethics and obeying unlawful orders. So the first thing that happens when anybody joins the military is they take an oath. And that oath is to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to obey the orders of the officers appointed over me. And it's understood that that second part is within the context of the first part, right?
Right.
And so it's on us to know the Constitution. It's on us to know these principles. It's on us to lead. And it's on our politicians to represent us. But that means we've got to put ourselves back again in the place where we say, no, like this is a government by the people, of the people, for the people. You work for us. And
right on.
And so it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. It's going to have to be sustained. No change occurs without sustained effort in a single direction over a prolonged period of time, right? But
people are wondering today, and we hear the calls here, what can we do? Because everybody can sing the song you're singing, but what can we do?
Well, I think the first thing we all need to do is we need to understand that the idea of government by experts is impossible to reconcile with a constitutional governance as is laid out in our documents.
Oh, that's right.
Impossible to reconcile, okay? And so the first thing we've got to do is we've got to understand that. And so when someone gets up and says, I'm a progressive, right? What they mean is I'm for government by experts. And all we needed was the last 18 months that should have been able to show anybody and everybody that our experts might be wonderful people. They might be people trying to do the best that they know how to do, but nobody is that smart. Nobody. They just aren't. And so what we've got to do is we've got to understand, first thing, is that all this language about progressivism in the United States is absolutely antithetical to the Constitution. It cannot be reconciled. That to achieve progressive goals and vision is to overthrow the Constitution of the United States. It just is. Like, you cannot do what they want to do and still follow the Constitution. It can't be done. And so then understanding that, the next thing we have to do is absolutely, like, we need to see and want out of everybody that we're going to give any power to at whatever level, local and all the way up, right, is we want to know that they're principle driven, that they're constitutionally driven, that there are things they're going to say no to, that they would rather be honest and poor. There's government money they're not going to take. No, we're not going to take that federal money into this thing, into our school or into our city or into our whatever, because it comes with strings that we don't want hooked. We don't want those hooks in us. We would rather be without that money. What are you prepared to say no to? What are you prepared to pass on? What shiny thing are you gonna say? We're better off without that shiny thing, because what we'll be left with is character and integrity, and that will win in the long run.
Bingo.
And then at a national level, what we've got to know out of our folks is that they know they work for us, and we have to organize, and we have to be prepared to. The thing we have to work for almost is this transcends party. It really does. Is we've got to work for government that once again works for us. And so it almost. I would almost rather, right, have somebody in office who would rather tax me more, but understands the Constitution and believes in it, right? But disagrees with me about the level of taxation, perhaps, than somebody who says to me they want low taxation, but actually is a progressive. And you've got progressive Republicans, you've got progressive Democrats. This is not a partisan point. The mission is not a partisan organization. I am not a partisan individual. I'm an American. And I believe that there's a thing in the genius of America is precisely that our system is an open system. And expertise is a closed system.
That's a good point.
And the other thing is it demands, because it's a closed system, it demands that the experts close the door behind them. They have to shut down any other ideas, any other opinions.
No challenges.
Because if there's if there's another idea, right, then why is my idea the one that gets to be enforced with
what
guns?
What makes you the expert if you don't have all the ideas?
Exactly. And so what right does my expertise have to be backed up by guns, right, the guns of government, if there are other potentially legitimate ideas out there? So that is called freedom, and debate, and that's why I'm saying progressivism and expertise and government by expert is impossible to reconcile with free speech. It's impossible to reconcile with free press. It's impossible to reconcile with all this stuff. Like we've got to stand against that, and that transcends party.
And we're at such an important crossroads now when dissension and debate and conversation and questioning is shut down now. That is a cornerstone of locking in progressive control, is if they can shut down all of the opposition, all the questions, and everything else.
That's right.
And so that's why what we're seeing is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, and if anyone is listening, right, we said, hey, you can look at China, and you can see why what we did with the Taliban's a bad idea, right? We thought we could sort of, or the same thing with Iran. They're doing the same thing with Iran. Like, if we can just bring them into the family of nations, right, then they'll moderate and they'll be nice. But it doesn't work with some people. All you do at that point is you arm a sociopath, okay? So there's some people that stuff doesn't work with, and you can look at how it worked with China, and you can see that's a bad idea with the Taliban, it's a bad idea with Iran, right? Because you've got evidence, right? And so I would want all of the listeners to say, look, if you want to see the evidence of what government by expert looks like, all right, and what the consequences of it are to the loss of the freedom of speech, which ultimately means the loss of good ideas, which ultimately means government by mediocrities instead of by experts, right? All you got to do is look around America in the last 12 months.
Yeah, that's right.
And ask yourself, is this really better? Is this really better?
No.
You know, and that has nothing to do with party. It has nothing to do with party. And we're so beyond that. We are so beyond that, right? Like, and that's what I would say. And so that's what when I see Afghanistan, like, that's what happens to me as a soldier, is like, oh my goodness, like, this is what happens when you have a general, you know, when your general corps has been all vetted for woke politics instead of, of being great soldiers. This is what, you start doing things you never do, which is leave people behind and leave stuff behind.